was known as the Sword of Allah, one of the greatest generals in history, one of Islam's greatest heroes. His name, Khalid ibn al-Walid. Sunnahfollowers presents a new series presented by Ustad Mukhtar Shahid. Coming soon, so stay tuned. Streaming on all major platforms. Channel Sunnahfollowers.
About Khalid, but we also have been introduced to people like Dirar, who they call the naked champion, and Al-Qaqa, whom Abu Bakr has sent one man to Khalid's army when they were in a particular bind, and all of these wonderful bouts of bravery and courage in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that the Muslims had done. We had gone in the beginning somewhat dealing with Khalid's journey when the Muslims were tested by the death of the Prophet ﷺ and the, in some opinions, not as big as people think, but a large number of people left Islam. And they wanted to go back to doing some of the deplorable behaviors that they had done prior to Islam. And Abu Bakr, with his strength and resolve, was not having it. And so he sent the rays sort of Allah in many situations in order to go deal with these rebels. And alhamdulillah, the peninsula ended up coming back to Islam. And even those people who had said that they were prophets, that there were a couple of them who had entered into Islam, and mashallah, and one particularly ended up dying as a martyr, fighting for Islam. And so we had journeyed on the situation dealing with the Persians, that the Muslims were successful in dealing with Iraq. And now we're in Asham. This is Asham would be now Palestine and Syria. And I'm trying to remember some of the, I want to say Lebanon, and it's one other place that I think that I'm forgetting about. But that was all considered Asham. So the Muslims are pushing up into Roman territory. And I would say that the Romans kind of seemed that they were a little bit more of a challenge than the Persians were. Number one, the Roman Empire, who had existed for hundreds and hundreds of years, had taken a lot of territory, and they were very skilled fighters. And they were made up of a lot of different people. They had Greeks and Slavs. They had Arabs in their army. And so they had a lot of experience in dealing and fighting in these wars, particularly against Persia, because these were the two bad boys on the block at that particular time. You know, once again, I want to reiterate that Islam was something that had taken the world by storm. The Prophet ﷺ was an individual whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent, and the Arabs were looked at as being like barbaric almost. A lot of them couldn't read or write, and they were divided through tribes and clans. This was the life of Arabia. And when Islam came, what it did is that the faith had ended up uniting, going all against the whole idea of clans, against tribes, and that now that these clans and tribes were brothers and sisters of each other in Islam. And as a result of that, and they also had this zeal for spreading Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's word, and in many situations that the Muslims were acting in a somewhat defensive situation, because now that Islam was growing in the region, and you had people who were allies to either the Persian or the Byzantine Empire, that they were going to eventually do something to the Muslims anyway. And so you had situations where, and like in Basra, these individuals had made a pact with the Muslims, and then they ended up breaking it and going back with either the Persians or the Romans. Okay, and so we kind of ended where Khalid and the other Muslims were victorious and taking down these different areas in Roman territory. And Heraclius is now really starting to take the Muslims serious. You got to remember, they had thousands upon thousands of troops at his disposal, but they couldn't take. Somebody would think, well, since they have all of these soldiers, or whatever, they couldn't take them and just all concentrate on the Muslims, because they themselves still had other enemies in certain parts of the world where they held control. So they couldn't do that. So if they had did that, then they would have another problem with people coming from behind and taking other territories away from them. But they had easily 50,000, 60,000, 70,000, 80,000 soldiers, and usually the Muslims were outnumbered 3-1. And so through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's permission, the Muslims were victorious in defeating the enemies that came amongst them, both in Persia and Asham. Okay, so a number of questions were raised whenever people had assembled, and this is dealing as far as questioning Heraclius, and they wanted to know if the Muslims could do what they did at Ajnadain with 90,000 men, and was successful at doing that. How much more could they do even if they have more people? We sent 90,000, they defeated them, and they kind of like pressuring him. Okay, so a delegation of prominent citizens that approached Thomas. Now Thomas is the son-in-law of Heraclius, and they apprised him of their fears and suggested, and he considered the possibility of making peace. So this is what they wanted him to do. But he had assured them that he had enough troops, and he was going to take the offensive, and he was going to drive the Muslims away. So special services was held in churches, and prayers were offered of deliverance and that threatened the city. So he decided to attempt a powerful move from the fort, and he was not somebody who was a coward. So Thomas was an individual who could fight really good. He was brave, and he was a religious Christian as well. Okay, so the following morning, early in around the third week of September, Thomas drew up men from all sectors of the city, and he formed a strong force at the gate of Thomas. And we talked about before, when the Muslims had gone, now we're dealing with Damascus. So when they had gone to the city of Damascus, there are different types of gates. And the Thomas gate, there's the East gate, there's some other gates that I can't remember, inshallah. We'll come across it as we talk. But these all of the gates that you could enter, and he had heavy forces that were protecting these gates. Okay, so he started an operation and concentrated a shower of arrows and stones against the Muslim archers in order to drive them back and get more room from the gate. All right, so the Muslims then in turn answered with a bunch of arrows. So they're going back and forth. And at the very beginning of this exchange, several Muslims were killed. One of them was an individual by the name of Aban. Okay, his name was Aban bin Sa'id bin al-As. And he was a man who just recently got married, subhanAllah. He just got married, and he ends up getting killed. So his widow, as soon as she heard that she became a widow, she herself took up a bow, and she joined the Muslim archers in order to seek the revenge for them killing her husband. So on the wall of the fort, near the gate of Thomas, stood a priest with a large cross, and he was, giving the man courage. And so when she saw him, she shot an arrow and she hit him, and he ended up dropping the cross, and he fell over the wall. So then the arrow that she shot at him, it went through his chest, and like I said, he tumbled over the wall. So this exchange of the Romans got the better of the Muslims, and they ended up pushing the Muslims back even still. The bows of the Romans are a lot more superior, and of course, you're going to have more of an advantage shooting down than you are shooting up. So very soon, there was heavy fighting between the two bodies of men, and Shahrabil's corps was outnumbered but held to the ground. So he had different, Dirar had a gate, Khalid was at a gate, Shahrabil was at a gate, Abu Ubaidah was at a gate, and I think that was either 4 or 5 gates. So all of these were seasoned veterans, and he and Thomas is coming after Shahrabil's gate the most. So they're fighting like crazy. So Shahrabil, he saw it coming, and with a blood-covered sword in his hand, he prepared to meet him. So before Thomas could reach Shahrabil, he was struck in his right eye. And guess who shot him in his right eye? The widow of Aban. So sister is the one that shot him in his eye. So he quickly, he fell, obviously, and he was picked up by his men, and he was taken back to the fort. So under the pressure, the swordsmen, under the punishing fire of the Muslim archers, they deployed on the flanks. And the Romans returned to the fort, and they leaving behind a large number of dead people. And his eye, it didn't do as much damage as they thought it was, that they thought it did. So he swore that he would take 1,000 eyes in return. And he would not only defeat these Muslims, but he would only defeat the Muslims and follow them into Arabia. So not only, it's not good enough that he's defeating them, he's going to follow them into Arabia because he's upset at what this sister just did to him. So Shahrabil, he had lost quite a large number of men, and they was killed and it was wounded, and he feared that the Romans would make another run at them. Okay, and if they did, they might actually succeed in breaking through the Muslim corps. So then he sends for Khalid, and he wants Khalid to come and spare him some men. So Khalid was like, look, I can't give you anybody. But Zirar had about 2,000 men with him. So Khalid was saying, look, if you get under a real serious problem, then Zirar might be able to come and lend you some aid. So for the night, Thomas ends up once again concentrating towards Shahrabil's troops. And the location of various Muslim corps and their commanders were known in detail to the garrison. So remember, I told you that information is a key factor when you're dealing in war. Okay, so they know Shahrabil's here, they know where Khalid is, they know where Abu Ubaidah is, and inshallah, as we go further into the story, it's really to the Romans' benefit to know exactly as to who is at what gate. Okay, so if success were achieved in any sector other than the gate of Thomas, it could be converted into a main sector, and the success exploited accordingly. So Thomas ordered that sallies form at Jabia Gate. So this is another gate. This is a small gate in the east gate. Okay, so for the last, he allotted rather more forces than the others. So Khalid would be unable to move to Shahrabil's help and take command undecisive. So this person is a very skilled general and fighter. He knows exactly what he's doing, and I would say he seemed to be a better tactician than when the Muslims were fighting against the Persians. Okay, so his orders emphasized a need for swift attacks so that the Muslims would be caught unaware and try to destroy the Muslims' camps. So any Muslim wishing to surrender would be killed on the spot, but Khalid, who was to be taken alive. So they said, don't kill Khalid, we got to take him alive. That would be a huge reward, you know what I mean, if they brought him back to Heraclius. So the moon would rise about 2 hours before midnight. Obviously, it's a full moon. You got to remember something. This is not like you living in the city. When you are in pitch black and the moon is full, it's like a light out there. It's like what Allah says, and then the moon is like a lamp. Okay? And so on his orders, the gates was flung open and the attacks started becoming simultaneously. So in the moonlight, the Roman attacks began as planned. And at Jabia Gate, there was some hard fighting, and Abu Ubaidah even ended up entering into the fight himself. For the most part, generals Khalid himself was a little bit different. Even the Prophet ﷺ did not engage in battle like the warriors did. But Khalid, who was a general, and he could have just been given orders, no, he was right in the thick of everything. Abu Ubaidah kind of had taken that same stance, but or he would be kind of held back and given orders. But in this situation, Abu Ubaidah even drew a sword, and he was a very well accomplished swordsman. So it wasn't like he didn't know how to fight. So Abu Ubaidah himself killed several of the Romans, and then they end up running back into the city. So the small gate, Yazid had few troops and positioned at other gates, and the Romans gained some initial success. But Dhirar was nearby, and he joined Yazid's corps with about 2,000 warriors. So without a moment's delay, Dhirar hurled his men at the enemy, and the Romans reacted as if they had been by, like they was crazy, wild animals. The Muslims were fighting like that. And then they ended up running on their heels, and Dhirar was trying to run and kill as many of them as he possibly could. So at the East Gate, the situation became even more serious. And the larger Roman force had been assigned to this particular sector. So from the clouds, Khalid was able to judge the enemy had advanced further if they had been allowed to. Okay, so fearing that Rafi, who was his son-in-law, may not be able to hold the attack, he went into the battle himself with about 400 veterans from the mobile guard. Remember, we talked about this. These was like the best of the best. That was with Khalid. So as they got to the Romans, he gave a personal battle cry and said, "I am a noble warrior. I'm Khalid ibn Walid." So the battle cry was known to all of the Romans, and the effect it messed them up when they heard that it was Khalid that was coming into this battle. So soon the Romans were full of retreat, with the Muslims cutting down any type of stragglers. So most of the force was able to re-enter into the city, and they closed the East Gate behind them. Okay, so the heaviest fighting took place at the gate of Thomas. And this, once again, I said, this is Sharabil's corps. He's there, having fought hard action during the day and had to bear the brunt of fighting at night. So he's not giving Sharabil any type of rest. They coming in, they fight them in the daytime, and then they fighting them late at night as well too. So this seemed like he had attacked after midnight the last time. In the process, subject to withering fire from Sharabil's archers, in spite of some losses, they completed the deployment and advanced for the battle. So for about 2 hours of fighting, they continued with Sharabil's men struggling to hold the Roman attack. So they suffering at that part of the fort. So shortly after midnight, Thomas, who himself was fighting in the front ranks, he singled out Sharabil, and the Muslim commander could easily be identified by the orders that he was given. Now, this is something that made, of course, the most sense. You want to try to kill, number one, Sharabil is known. All of the Muslims now who got these reputations are known by the enemy in terms of the skill set they are, the name that they have, but you couldn't tell who was who, because sometimes they would have a face cover. But if you got somebody doing this and doing that, doing this, they know that that's the commander. So he sees Sharabil because he was giving orders, and then the two commanders paired off and began dueling with a sword and a shield. All right. So, and for some time, the rest of the soldiers were locked in frenzied combat, and the duel of the champions continued with no success on either side. So they going at it pretty good, and nothing is really happening. They just not dying. So Sharabil, seeing an opening, he struck with all his might at the shoulder of Thomas, but his sword had landed in a metal part, and he ended up losing his sword, and he fell. And so now Thomas got he's got Sharabil where he can kill him. And alhamdulillah, two Muslims had saw that Sharabil was down, and they ran and they pulled him back, and he was able to pick up a sword pick up a sword of a fallen Muslim, because when he hit it, his sword broke, and then he returned to combat. But then when he got ready to fight Thomas again, Thomas was gone. So by now the Romans had enough to battle, and seeing that there was no weakening in the Muslim front, he decided to continue to attack. Attacking the Muslims would be basically pointless to do that. Okay, so they had withdrew and had lost, and a lot of their people, the Romans had a lot of their people got killed. So the Muslims didn't follow him either. I mean, fighting is anybody who ever been in a fight before, if you fight somebody for 60 seconds, you winded. So these people were fighting each other for 2 hours, and they was tired. So he had lost thousands of men, and as he's going in these attacks are going against the Muslims. You know what I mean? So they would run out there. His tactic was to run out there real quick, catch the Muslims off guard, kill as many of them as he can, and then try to run back into the fort before the Muslims knew would hit him, basically. Okay? So after the failure of the night raid, the dark clouds was threatening the great city, and they don't really see any type of hope in getting out of this situation. Okay, so there was a widespread grumbling amongst the people that they wanted to have peace, and they're like, "Look, man, this is ridiculous. These guys have killed thousands of us. We going out there, they not breaking, they standing up, and they don't look like they're going anywhere." Okay, because Abu Bakr's orders to Khalid was take Damascus and don't come back until you do. Don't do anything. Don't go anywhere else. Damascus is where you need to be, where you need to stay, and where you need to take this over. Okay, so he was prepared to make peace. Thomas was prepared to make peace, but was Khalid prepared to make peace? And Khalid was known as a person of violence. He looked at battle as almost like a sport to him, as something he enjoyed. And so, he didn't really know how this was going to go. But by now, like I said, the Romans knew the generals very well. They knew about Yazid, they knew about Khalid, they knew about Abu Ubaidah, they knew about Shorabil, in terms of, because just like the Muslims have observed them and they have their people coming, and rumors and things about these particular people have gotten to them too. So Abu Ubaidah, who was not the commander of the army, now remember that Abu Ubaidah was there. Abu Bakr had given Abu Ubaidah command, but Abu Ubaidah is not a skilled general like Khalid. So when the Muslims had ended up getting into a certain situation, then Abu Bakr made Khalid the commander in chief. So now Abu Ubaidah is the second in command. Okay, so for 2 or 3 days, this dilemma continued with Thomas, and it was taken out of the hands of everybody by the name of somebody they called Jonah the Lover. Okay, so Jonah was the son of Marcus, who was a Greek, and he was madly in love with this girl that he had just gotten married to, who was Greek as well. And he had not it sounds like the contract, so to speak, was made, and they were technically married, but he was not able to be with her. Okay, so when this stuff had jumped off, he was trying to get them to give him his wife, but they're like, "Look, man, I mean," which is understandable. The last thing should be on your mind is being with a wife in the situation that we in. The Muslims is surrounding us. More than likely, we could get killed. We're going to be taken captive. We're going to lose all our stuff. And here this guy is sitting there talking about his wife, and he want to be with her and all this other stuff. Well, they probably like, "We want to be with ours too." So he gets mad, and he's so in love with this woman and want to be with her so bad. He lowered himself with the aid of a rope near the east gate And he approached the Muslim guard and said, listen, I want you to take me to Khalid ibn Walid. So as soon as he was sent to the to Khalid, he narrated this sad story to Khalid, and he explained the purpose of his visit. And he would he would wanted to know if Khalid was going to help him get to his wife. And of course, if it's something in it that Khalid could use, he most certainly would do something like that. So what he did, he informed Khalid that the city, this particular night, the people were celebrating a festival, and basically they was going to be really drunk. And so they weren't going to be standing guard like they usually would. Number one, the Muslims have not been able to get over the wall. There's been guards over there. They've been fighting them for like a month. Basically, they've been laying siege to this spot for like a month. They haven't been really getting, so they feel comfortable. It's like, look, we got guards out there and everything will be cool. The Muslims we got the gates locked. They're not coming in. Every time we've had an issue, we had to go out there and fight them. They can't come in here and do nothing to us. So what Jonah did, he goes and he tells them about the fact that they having a party up in there and they drunk. And even the soldiers themselves, a lot of them probably is going to be drinking too. So Khalid, he felt that he could trust what he was saying and that he felt that the man was being sincere. So Khalid offered him Islam, and the individual, he accepted Islam. He became Muslim. So during the past couple years, Jonah had been hearing about Islam, and he was inclined to becoming Muslim anyway. So he has this interaction with Khalid, and Khalid offers him the deen. He accepts. So he told him, go back into the city and wait, which Jonah ended up doing. Now, I don't know if people remember when we talked about this last week, there wasn't a lot of men that they could do, but how they would get information to Hercules was probably using this same rope that Jonah did. So they could lower like a man down, but you couldn't do a whole army coming down this thing. Plus, it wouldn't be anything anyway because of the fact that they were guarding this gate from the inside anyway. Okay. So as soon as Jonah departed, Khalid ordered ropes and preparation for rope ladders. And there was a time to coordinate a plan of attack for the whole entire army. So Khalid decided that he would storm the fort by the east gate, and with just the core of Iraq was positioned there. All right. So these are the people that have been fighting with him. He got some of the best the veterans is there. Okay. So the moon would rise about midnight, and as soon as the assault, and this is when the assault would begin. Okay. Also, for those of us who've been camping and we've been out at nighttime, your eyes adjust really quick. And even if it's really dark outside, your eyes adjust really quick and you can see even in the dark. So he would have 100 men scale the wall at a place near the east gate, and it was known as this was the most impregnable part of the fortress. So why? There's nobody there. They figured this is the most secure spot, and so therefore it made them lax and not necessarily guarding it like they would have, because this is the one that was the most impregnable. So Khalid, being who he is, he would always do what the enemy thought he wouldn't do. So at first, the three men would climb up with ropes, and then rope ladders would be fastened to the ropes and hauled up, and by the three would be used, and the rest would be picked 100 to get to the top. Okay, so some men would remain at the top, while others would descend into the fort and kill any guards found at the gate and open the gate. So when then the core would rush in, and then they would start to attack. So the three leaders were able to scale Qaqa, of course, that makes sense. Khalid, that makes sense, and a brother by the name of Maz'ur ibn Adi. So the ropes were thrown, lassoing, and they were thrown up there. We've seen them on the cartoons. They would take it and throw the thing, and then you would go, it's like hooks. You understand what I mean? And they would hit the stone. They climbed up those, and then they were able to get the ladders and throw them up there for the other people to come in. So after a party had rushed the gate, so the two of the sentries that stood guard. So Khalid killed one, and Al-Qaqa killed the other one. And by this time, the alarm went off that the Muslims were now in by the East Gate. So it could have been really serious. They could have cut them into pieces, because now you only got a few people and you got the whole army rushing towards you, getting ready to try to kill you. So the rest of the Muslim party took a position that kept the Romans away, while Khalid and Qaqa dealt with the gate. So they broke the lock, and then the gate was flung open, and the Muslims came running in there. Okay, so they was killing people left and right. So Damascus was now awake. People, they might have sobered up, but the Roman soldiers rushed to their positions, and in terms of the drills that they had rehearsed, and only a small reserve remained at the hands of Thomas as Khalid began his onslaught in the center of Damascus, killing anybody that stood in his way. So shortly before dawn, Thomas played his last card brilliantly. And this is why, brothers and sisters, like I said, half of the battle is having information. That is the biggest part of how these soldiers, anybody else trying to do something, than having information. Okay, so what he did, he guessed that Khalid was attacking alone, and because the other corps were not storming the fort with him. Okay, so he figured, he knows that each one of these generals are at different gates. So he figured, it's Khalid got to be by itself. So that means that Abu Ubaidah, it has not attacked with Khalid. So he knows that Abu Ubaidah, he's got information that Abu Ubaidah is gentle, he's kind-hearted, and he's not like Khalid. So what he does is he rushes and has a bunch of men go towards Khalid in order to keep him on hold as much as they can, so he can go talk to Abu Ubaidah and try to have some kind of peace with Abu Ubaidah. Okay? So Abu Ubaidah had no doubt in his mind that Khalid would also agree to peace. So he comes to him and he says, listen, I want to make peace. And Abu Ubaidah goes ahead and he accepts it. Now they got a group of Muslims that have accepted it, and the other group of Muslims that's fighting like crazy, killing people left and right, and they don't know about each other. Okay? So Damascus will be entered peacefully, and there will be no bloodshed, no plundering, no enslavement, and no destruction. And the inhabitants would pay the jizya, the garrisons, and any local inhabitants who wish to do so free to depart from the city and their goods. So this is what him and Abu Ubaidah were talking about. After this, the Roman envoys went to the corps commanders at the other gates and informed them of the peace that had been reached with Abu Ubaidah. So soon after dawn, he followed by Abu Ubaidah, followed by the officers that was with him and the rest of the corps. They entered Damascus at the Jabiyah gate, and he marched toward the center of the city, and he was accompanied by Harbis and by Thomas, okay, and several other dignitaries, some bishops of Damascus, these people of high rank. So Abu Ubaidah is walking peacefully, and Khalid is coming like a tornado, and they arrive at the same time. So you got one group of people coming, and everybody is chilling and smiling, and Khalid is sitting there, and the rest of the other Muslims drenched with blood, killing people left and right. And then it says that they look at each other in astonishment. So Khalid is looking at Abu Ubaidah with his sword in his sheath. Other Muslims with Abu Ubaidah, they got their swords in their sheath. And he's looking at Khalid, and his blood all over Khalid. Hands is bloody. The Muslim swords is all bloody. And they looking like, what in the heck is going on? So Abu Ubaidah then, he broke the silence. He said, "O father of Suleiman, Allah has given us this city, and peace at my hand has made it unnecessary for the Muslims to fight for it." And then Khalid says, "What peace? I captured the city by force. Our swords are red with their blood, and we have taken the spoils and slaves." So it was clear that there was going to be or it could have been a really bad situation between these two generals. And it could have had some serious consequences. Now, we know in history that in other situations with other people, this would have been a horrible, horrible thing. So Khalid was the commander, was to be obeyed, number one. And now, but you have a person like Abu Ubaidah on the scene. Okay, so his judgment Khalid's judgment was unquestionable. If Khalid said that this is what he was going to do, and this is what you did. So the fact that Abu Ubaidah had done that, it really made Khalid extremely angry. So you have somebody with the stature of Khalid, then you got this person the stature of Abu Ubaidah. Okay, so he wasn't the military genius that Khalid was, but he was the topmost as far as the way that Muslims looked at other Muslims. Abu Ubaidah is an early convert. He was one of the ones that was promised paradise, and he was known by the Prophet ﷺ himself, called Abu Ubaidah, the trusted one of the nation. He was also known as Al-Asram, and the one whose incisors is gone. Remember, his teeth is missing. And why is his teeth missing? Because on the day of the Battle of Uhud, the Prophet ﷺ got hit in the face, and it was embedded into his cheek, and Abu Ubaidah ran and pulled the metal out from the Prophet ﷺ's face, and he broke his teeth out. So now you got these two different type of people, and both of them got high status in the eyesight of the Muslims. So Abu Ubaidah was actually wrong, to be honest with you, and making peace without checking with Khalid. But Abu Ubaidah, his thing was like, man, we here for other reasons. We here because we want the people to become Muslim. We want to have justice throughout the land. And I just knew that that Khalid would agree with. He felt Khalid would agree with his decision in terms of more Muslims possibly getting killed. And it's like, we got the city. We don't have to fight anymore. Okay. So what made the situation less dangerous was the fact that the two men had genuine affection and respect for one another. So Abu Ubaidah knew that he could silence Khalid with a few words, and he was armed with the authority which Khalid was unaware, but he decided not to use the authority except as the last resort. So when all of the manner of persuasion had failed, being kind to Khalid, but more of that, we'll get to that part, later on. So he says, "O commander," said Abu Ubaidah, "knowing that I have entered the city peacefully." Khalid's eyes was flashed with anger, but he restrained himself in a voice which was not without respect. "You continue to be heedless. How can you have peace from when you have entered the city by force and their resistance is broken?" So Abu Ubaidah tells him, he says, look, he says, "Fear Allah." He says, "Fear Allah. I have given them guarantee of peace, and the matter is settled. You have no authority to give them peace without my orders, and I am commander over you, and I shall not sheathe my sword until I've destroyed them to the last man." So this is a tense. So the Romans, this stuff is being translated to them, so they don't know what's getting ready to happen to them. So Abu Ubaidah says, "I never believed that you would oppose me when I gave them guarantee of peace from every single one of them. And I have given them peace in every name of Allah, exalted be He, and of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Muslims who were with me agreed to this peace, and breaking the pacts is not one of our traits." That's the ammo that he had as a last resort to Khalid. He uses the Prophet ﷺ, whom Khalid loved a great deal. He uses that by the attributes, you understand, that's associated with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and giving peace. And he's like, listen, how are you going to go against, are we Muslim? We don't break our pacts with people. We don't do stuff like that. And you about to make us look bad, so on and so forth. Now, I want to stop here for a minute, because it goes to show you how special Abu Ubaidah was. we've heard about Abu Ubaidah before and stuff like that. This really goes to show us how special of a person Abu Ubaidah was. You have people sometimes that you come across and everybody just loves them. They have wonderful character. They just a beautiful person. And Abu Ubaidah, he was a beautiful person. He was a man's man. And for the fact, I believe, this is my opinion, if anybody other than Abu Ubaidah had did what he did, if it was Dirar, if it was Sharabil, if it was Al-Qaqa, if it was anybody else, Khalid would have probably went off on them. Even when Khalid was angry and upset, his tone, his demeanor was still soft with Abu Ubaidah. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless both of them, because this really goes to show how much of a wonderful person, mashallah, tabarakallah, that Abu Ubaidah was. Okay? And so at the stage of tiring, listening to this going back and forth, Khalid's soldiers was getting ready to just say, man, forget this. And they was about to start killing more Roman soldiers. So Abu Ubaidah pushes past Khalid and told him to stop. He obeyed him to stop. And the other three corps commanders got together and began to discuss the situation. So after a few minutes, they reached an agreement among themselves, and they said, listen, Khalid, let's go on ahead and roll what Abu Ubaidah said. You know what I mean? And he said that the Muslims have given a guarantee of safety and then slaughtered those whose safety had been guaranteed. No other city would ever surrender to us as Muslims. And this is a good point. If it's word travels, people talk, right? So a lot of times, even when the Muslims, based upon their character and how well they behaved, you had situations of towns that they entered who did not fight them and who welcomed them because they understood that the Muslims, they were honorable in terms of their agreements. Okay. And so he says, look, Abu Ubaidah gave them a pledge of peace. If we go and we break that and we slaughter them in here, nobody is going to surrender to us the next time we end up going into a situation, and that's going to be bad. Okay. So the emotions of Khalid never interfered with his reasoning. So he was a logical person. He wasn't just crazy and bloodthirsty like that. His thing was like, you know what, you're right. He said, I agree to it. He said, but except for them two. Talking about Thomas and Harvest. He said, no. I want them to. That everybody else can go, but then. And then Abu Ubaidah says, listen, I mean, they was the first to come to me. You know what I mean? My word must not be broken. May Allah have mercy on you. So he's appealing to the heart of Khalid. When a person believes and loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that may Allah have mercy on you, that hits you a whole different type of way. Okay? So Khalid, he gave up. He said, by Allah, but for your word, I would certainly have killed them. Let them get out of the city, both of them, and may Allah's curse follow them wherever they go. Man, they killed a lot of Muslims, man. This is not like some happy occasion for Khalid. You understand what I'm saying? So when they were Harvest and Thomas, the people were translating for them, and they realized, okay, alhamdulillah, they breathed a sigh of relief. And so now they moved to Abu Ubaidah with an interpreter and asked for permission to depart on any route that they chose. So Abu Ubaidah told them, yeah, you could do that. He said, go any route you choose, but if we conquer any place that you're residing, the guarantee of peace is over with. Okay? So Thomas, fearing for the pursuit of Khalid, he then requested, now this is where he messed up, and inshallah, we're about to find out why. He said, give us 3 days of peace, then a truce would be ended. All right, so I want everybody to remember that. 3 days of peace, and the truce is ended. Thereafter, if you catch up with us, do as you will, kill us or enslave us. Okay, so here Khalid entered talks. He agreed, except that you take nothing except for food on the journey. So then they again, they go to Abu Ubaidah. They objected to that. They said, my pact with them Abu Ubaidah says, my pact with them allows them to take all their belongings, Khalid. You know what I'm saying? I agree to this. So Khalid was like, all right, cool. Well, they can't take any weapons with them. So now Thomas, he said, listen, y'all not the only enemies that we got. There's no way that we can leave without any weapons and, and be out there like that. We'll be sitting ducks basically. So Khalid went so far as to agree that every man could take one weapon with him, either a sword or a lance or a bow. And the last of the problems was settled. So immediately after this, it was shortly after sunrise, and the pact was drawn up and it was signed by Khalid. And it goes by this. It reads, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. This is given by Khalid ibn Walid to the people of Damascus. When the Muslims enter, the people shall have safety from themselves, their property, their temples, and the walls of their city, in which nothing shall be destroyed. They have this guarantee on behalf of Allah and His Messenger, on whom the blessings and peace and the Caliph and the faithful, from whom they shall receive nothing but good as long as they pay the jizya. Okay? So the rate of the jizya was fixed at 1 dinar per man, and a certain amount of food had to be provided to the Muslims. Okay? So the scale of which was laid down. So the Muslims, Damascus had been taken by the Muslims, and the greatest prize of Syria was Damascus. So subhanAllah, they lost that, with the exception of Antioch. That was a big thing for the Romans. So those who had conquered the city, they had mixed feelings about this victory. So the Muslims had fought hard for this prize, and they had a lot of casualties as a result of it, right? And they struggled heroically for a month and had given their blood and their sweat in order to deal with this victory. And they had taken the city by sword, especially the core that was from Iraq. All right, that was with Khalid. And they had stormed it in the last night and crushed all the resistance. But the fruits of their labor had been snatched away by the clever diplomacy of Thomas and the generosity and the kind-heartedness of Abu Ubaidah. Okay? So the son of the surgeon, and this is one of Abu Ubaidah's his nickname. He had no business to do this, but after he was the trusted one of the nation, and not a word was going to be raised against him. Nobody was going to say anything about what he did. They was angry about it. They didn't think it was cool. But hey, man, this is somebody we love. I mean, what can you say? I mean, this is Abu Ubaidah that came up with this. We are in the city. Yeah, mashallah. So the Muslims gathered in groups, and they saw the Romans marching out of the city. So the convoy consisted of garrison of thousands of civilians who didn't want to be under the Muslims' rule. Okay, so they moved out with their wives and their children. Thomas' wife, who was the daughter of Heraclius, traveled with her husband too. So she was in Damascus with him. So the convoy went hundreds of carriages and wagons and belongings of the travelers and merchandise of the city, and including 300 bales of the finest brocade belonging to Heraclius. And some Muslims looked and they was angry. They was upset. They was angry. All of the wealth of Damascus was gone. Okay, so it was a bitter moment for them, and they felt like they should have had that stuff, because the people they was fighting didn't give up to them. They was trying to kill them, and they had came and mashallah, Allahu Alam, which I think they would have. And Thomas felt that the Muslims was going to take the city. Okay, so Khalid stood with some officers and men, and he was gazing. He was angry. Okay, so they was leaving nothing of value in Damascus. So this made him this pained his heart, and he was the commander of the army, and he had conquered Damascus by the sword. As far as he was concerned, he had stormed the fort, and Abu Ubaidah had done this. Okay, so the look on the Muslims' face, they was not happy. So all of this should have been together, but along the route stood groups of Muslims watching in silence, and they could easily pounce on the convoy. You understand? But mashallah, the Muslims had dignity and they had discipline, and they had a moral obligation not to break this pact that they came up with. So Khalid, it took everything in him not to just go off as he seen them living. he makes a dua. It said that he raised his hands up and he said, "Oh Allah, give all this sustenance for the Muslims." So he's seeing all of this stuff end up coming, is leaving. He's asking Allah that, please Allah, let this somehow, let this get in our hands. So it's almost like they walking out the city with all of their stuff like, nah, 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 nah. That's how they looking at the Muslims. And it's like, yeah, y'all can have this stuff. We got our stuff. We getting ready to go somewhere to another part of the Roman Empire. Y'all can have all of this. And it was nothing as far as the Muslims was concerned. So Khalid, as he's gazing upon this, he makes this dua and he hears a cough behind him. You know, like somebody trying to get his attention. And who was it? It was Jonah the lover. So he stood sad, and he was upset for a whole nother reason. His woman was gone. Okay. So when the Muslims had came into Damascus, he was, mashallah, he was able to get with his wife, right? So she surrendered, they got together, and he's like, look, come on, I want you to come with me, we good. And then, but when she found out that he had converted to Islam, he was a friend of the Muslims, she rejected him. And then she ended up going with a convoy of Thomas as well, okay? So it's a reason why he said, look, give us 3 days of peace. 3 days is a long time to be gone somewhere. So the Muslims couldn't make a move from Damascus or do anything within 3 days anyway. So they figured wherever they was going, they was not going to be able to catch up with them anyway. So Jonah knew of several shortcuts which fast-moving horsemen could use to overtake the convoy. Okay, and still several Syrian forts, Emesa, Baalbek, Tripoli, were close enough to reach in 3 or 4 days, and the convoy would safely within the walls and any of these before the Muslims could catch up with them. Okay, so now Jonah's upset that his woman did diss him again, and he's like, listen, I gotta get her, I still gotta go get her. Jonah's thing is like, I want my woman. Y'all can have this other stuff, I want her. So look, I know a way. They trying to be slick, they think they're not gonna get you. I know a way in which that you could take a shortcut, and I know where they're going. They're going towards Antioch. So they thought the Muslims, they had the Muslims thinking they were going to go another way. So they started going toward, they were going towards Antioch where Heraclius was. So he's saying, look, I know a shortcut that we could take in order to get to them. So now Khalid was extremely excited. All right. So within 3 days, the 3-day grace period was now over with. So the mobile guard would dash out in pursuit and go at a high speed to try to go catch up with the people who just left. So on the morning of the 4th day, shortly after sunrise, at the same exact time when the period of the grace period had ended, the mobile guard galloped away from Damascus with Khalid and Jonah in the lead, and now Abu Ubaidah was left as the commander in Damascus. Okay, so I want people to understand the Muslims did not break the pact. The guy specifically said, give us 3 days of peace, and after that, if you catch up with us, it's whatever. He made a statement that he did not think they were going to be able to do. So he makes this statement in order to maybe, he felt maybe sweeten the deal because he saw the attitude that Khalid did not want to let them go. Okay? So the Muslim caught up with the convoy a short distance from Antioch and not far from the sea on the plateau beyond the rain hills of El Abrash by the Arabs, at Barda by the Romans. So here they stood. There was a heavy downpour, and the convoy had dispersed on the plateau seeking shelter and in this bad weather. So all of the goods had laid all over the place. Okay, so it's pouring down rain, and the Romans didn't have any suspicion that the Muslims was coming. They felt totally safe, and they know that Antioch is right there. So they really felt safe. Okay, so this particular excursion became known as the Medal of Brocade, because all of this fine brocade that they had taken, said was like 300 bales. And this brocade is just laying all over the place while they seeking shelter. after whatever, they could come get the rain stopped, they could come get it, and they could go wherever they were trying to go. So now the weather had cleared up, and Jonah and other scouts established the location of the convoy without being spotted. And they brought sufficient intelligence to Khalid for the plan for the attack. So he took a few hours to give his orders and position a mobile guard for this particular task. So Khalid, in a movement of surprise, he showed this superb skill and military principles. So the Romans received their first indication of the Muslims when about a regiment of cavalry came charging at them from the south, along the road from Damascus and led by Zirar. All right. How do they know it was Zirar? He's not wearing a shirt. He's bare-chested. Okay. So the Romans were surprised that Zirar had caught up to them. That's number one. But they look in and they only see a small force with him. So they like, okay, cool. We can fight him and destroy him quick. Whoever is with him, we can get them quick. It's a lot of us. So a half an hour later, another body of Muslims come. Now this time it's about 1,000 horses, and this is led by Rafi. So they appear from the east, and the Muslims now realize the mistake they was in. They believed that it was only one regiment. Now they got to deal with two. So the Muslims had these two regiments. The first one was to draw attention from the Romans, and the second one, that 1,000 one, that was the one that was going to deal the blow to them that they had been worried about. So they was like, okay, cool, we're going to fight both of these regiments. So half an hour later, another regiment appeared from the north. And this is by Abdul Rahman ibn Abi Bakr. This is Abu Bakr's son. And now they really alarmed. So this was more dangerous than they had actually thought of. So they were cut off from Antioch. So now Abdul Rahman, he's coming, so they can't run towards Antioch. Okay, so he's got them cut off from that. So now they're dealing with three regiments. So the Romans had reformed, and their spirits was not so high like it was before. But once again, these guys is soldiers. So the Muslim regiment struck at Romans with swords and lances, and it was just havoc, like they was in a full-fledged battle. So the West appeared, and this time, so you got the East, the North, and now Khalid is coming from the West. And then he yells out, I'm the noble warrior Khalid ibn Walid. So Khalid and the rest of the Muslims started killing people left and right. Khalid killed Harbus and he killed Thomas. That was like some personal stuff probably for him. He really wanted to get them. And so after some more fighting, the Roman resistance, it collapsed. And since the Muslims, it wasn't a lot of them like it was before, a lot of the Romans were able to run, okay? But mashallah, their whole thing, by the time they were able to do that, the Muslims were able to get all of the stuff that they had lost. So they got the brocade, they had captives, and they started moving out. So Jonah, he sees his wife, and he tried to like take her by force. Like, no, like you one of those, come on, you coming with me. You know, I'm not listening to this, you coming with me. She took out a knife and she killed herself. Okay, so she had like a dagger underneath her dress, and she killed herself. She stabbed herself in the chest. And as she was dying, he was devastated. So he really, really loved this woman, man. And he swore that he would never be with another woman after her. You know, and he wouldn't even look at another woman. He wouldn't be with another woman. He wouldn't look at another woman. So when Khalid saw how messed up he was, you know, he felt really bad for him. And he offered him, he said, listen, man, you know, here's somebody you could marry. This is somebody of high status. So when Jonah looks up, because the person was decked out in jewelry and stuff, he looked up and was like, oh man, no, miraculous daughter. And he's like, no, I'm not trying to do that. He said Hercules would send either an army to get her back by force or envoys to arrange for her ransom. So he knew the lay of the land pretty good as far as the mindset. So the Muslims marched back with the spoils and the captives. And when about a day's march from Damascus, they saw a small cloud. coming towards them. And they knew it was one of those types of the dust kicking up where it wasn't a major army. Might have been like maybe 30, 40, people with them, maybe 100, Allahu Alam. But Khalid knew, because these cats know about war. They know that this is somebody not coming there to fight them. Okay, so this was an ambassador that was sent by Heraclius, and he says, I've come to know that you have what you have done to my army. Okay, you have killed my son-in-law and captured my daughter. You have won and got away safely. I now ask you for my daughter. Either return her to me on payment of ransom, or give her to me as a gift. For honor is a strong element in your character, mashallah. And this is what this is what he said. This ambassador is talking this as to, like, this is what Heraclius is saying himself. So honor was indeed a strong element for Khalid. And basically, he decided to take her and give her as a gift to her father. Okay. And he said, listen, now you can have her tell her the Heraclius, this is a gift from me. And I don't want any money and nothing like that from me. He can have her. So the ambassador, he took her, and they thanked Khalid profusely, and they returned back to Antioch. So Jonah remained, he was just all the way messed up. Nothing could cheer him up. Khalid even offered him a large reward from his own share of the spoils, trying to cheer him up, and nothing could cheer up Jonah except for the woman whom he had just lost. And mashallah, he remained true to a promise of being, that celibacy thing. Like, he not looking at a woman and not talking, not marrying another woman. And mashallah, he was killed, in the Battle of Yarmouk. And inshallah, we might talk about the Battle of Yarmouk. But he got, mashallah, he died as a martyr. And so his conversion. And that's sometimes we question these types of things when we hear this, right? As far as, did a person really become Muslim to save their skin, or was it political reason? So we know that, mashallah, that Jonah had accepted Islam sincerely to the point where he lost his life fighting for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the return of the mobile guard loaded with spoils was greeted with joy at the Muslims in Damascus. And alhamdulillah, Khalid had, by the permission of Allah, he had done it again. So the force had been absent for about 10 days. And so now a letter was sent off to Medina, and it was addressed to Abu Bakr. So he informed him of the conquest of Damascus, and how Abu Ubaidah had been deceived by the Romans. And he's pursued of the Roman convoy, and he killed Thomas and Harbus, and the capture of the spoils and the captives, and how he released Heraclius' daughter. And this letter was written in October. This is the 2nd of Shaban, and this is the 13th year of the Hijri. So the messenger carrying this letter had not gone many hours when Abu Ubaidah called Khalid aside and told him that Abu Bakr was dead and that Umar was now the caliph. And he held out a letter, and he to give that the caliph that Umar had written to Abu Ubaidah. And Khalid, he took it hesitantly. And he took the letter and began to read it. And the most important line that stood out to him: I appoint you commander of the army of Khalid ibn Walid. And then Khalid looked up from the letter. And so, alhamdulillah, we'll stop there. And inshallah, we'll open up for any questions or comments. Bismillah.